Hello and welcome to Radio Britannia with me, Alice Grant.
And me, Charlie Downs. This is the first episode of our new show, and each week we're going to be exploring the stories and the issues which don't get much of a hearing in other parts of the media. This week we're going to be talking about the ousting of the president-elect of the Oxford Union after his comments on the death of Charlie Kirk. Then we're going to be talking about the rise of the Green Party under the leadership of Zack Polanski and what that says about the political landscape. And finally, we're going to be ending on a topic that is rather close to my heart, which is the fact that I got married recently. And we're going to be talking about the fact that marriage is in decline, what marriage means, why it's important, and why so few people seem to think of it as being one of the most pressing issues of our time. And yet it gets so little kind of coverage in the mainstream.
Before we kick off, we are going to introduce ourselves. My name is Alice Grant. I'm 24 years old. I'm a law student, and I have been a political commentator since I was about 17, and I thoroughly enjoy it. Very happy to be here today.
And my name is Charlie Downs. I'm also 24, and I'm a political activist, a writer and a broadcaster. I'm the campaigns director at Restore Britain and write for a number of national outlets on issues from British identity through to the disaffection that young people feel in this country with politics and culture in general. So earlier this year, Charlie Kirk, the American conservative political activist, was tragically assassinated. And in the aftermath of that, there was a huge amount of discussion and indeed celebration from certain quarters of this event. One of these people who was celebrating Kirk's murder was the president-elect of the Oxford Union, George Aberonier. He was seen in a WhatsApp group to have said, "Let's effing go, Charlie Kirk got shot." And on Instagram, he said, "Charlie Kirk got shot, lol." And he was far from the only person kind of echoing these sentiments. There was a huge, terrifyingly huge number of people who seemed to delight in the fact that a political opponent, somebody with whom they disagreed, had been murdered for the crime of going to a university campus and seeking to have a debate with people that he didn't agree with. So, as of today, George Aberonier has been ousted from his position as president-elect of the Oxford Union following a no-confidence vote that he called himself in order to shore up his support, but which in fact resulted in a 2-1 majority against him. So he will not be going forward as the president of the Oxford Union. And in my view, this is a good thing because this has really sparked a debate around free speech and around what's getting called right-wing cancel culture. The idea that perhaps the right should take a page out of the left's book when it comes to how we approach the speech of those we disagree with. And Alice, I'm interested in what you think of how this has all gone down.
Yeah, so he was ousted by 1,228 votes. That's quite a significant majority. Most of them were alumni voting. However, I think given his comments, there's very little support, I think, for that sort of extreme response to a very tragic death.
Yeah.
Made all the more shocking that he'd actually met Charlie Kirk in person.
Of course.
So I think you're right. It brings up very interesting conversations about freedom of speech, cancel culture, I think, but also the sort of worrying trend that we see about the dehumanization of the opposite side. Because I think the only way in which someone could make those comments is if you just genuinely didn't see the person on the other side as like an actual human being with a family and with loved ones. So that's quite worrying. But what I'm curious to discuss with you, Charlie, is specifically about cancel culture, because obviously I think that those comments that he made were awful and have no place actually in dialogue. And I think, yeah, they don't speak very well at all about my university, former university. But my worry is that he's only 20 years old. These were comments he made privately on WhatsApp and that they were then publicised all over social media. And they have obviously had a dramatic impact on his life. I mean, we both know what it's like to be attacked on social media for various reasons, or just to have that sort of spotlight and to have comments made about us. What do you think, and what can we say about the fact that, is it really fair to have taken down his whole career, to made those comments in such a large aspect of his life? I mean, these are going to follow him around for the rest of his life.
Yes, I think this is really important because I, like you, I imagine, would never criticise somebody for being interested in and getting involved in politics at a young age. I think we'd be massive hypocrites if we did say that, in fact. However, sure, we all said stupid stuff when we were 20. I know I did, right? but I never celebrated the murder of a political opponent, because what we're dealing with there is something very, very different, right? What we're dealing with there is somebody who is possessed by an ideology that, as you say, doesn't view its opponents as human. And this is where my increasing skepticism of the value of debate and free speech as a truth-seeking exercise comes in, because I don't know that it's possible to have a good faith, constructive debate and dialogue with somebody who would sincerely rather see you murdered for your views than engage with them. I don't know that it's possible or even wise or intelligent to engage with somebody who thinks in that way. Because this is the point. What we're talking about here is the limits of the utility of free speech as a truth-seeking device. Because that's ultimately, that is the argument for free speech, classically, certainly, is that we arrive at the truth through discourse. And I'm very open to that, within limits. Because you can't, I mean, what is the point of having, seeking to have this kind of dialogue with somebody who celebrates the murder of people that they disagree with? I do think that the response that this Aberonier character has been met with ultimately is just.
I agree with you, it is just. I don't think you can be making those sorts of comments as the president of a society whose purpose is to encourage debate, whilst being just so blatantly irresponsible with your use of words. I think with sort of authority and being in that position that he was in, you need to have a much more mature understanding of responsibility. But then was only 20. I think my point was that they were specifically taken from this private context out into the public, and then there was this like massive storm. And I think it is right he was ousted. I mean, as I said, there's just no way I think he should be in that position if you have that sort of very childish, disrespectful views about someone else. So it is odd. I don't think he should have said those things at all. I think, that the friends of his who published them were, I don't think, exactly doing the right thing either, but it's obviously what's happened has happened. I think that it's good for us to know. And that we are still in a place where that kind of behaviour is condemned by society and was condemned by his college.
Well, this, I think, is the larger point, because I think conservatives, those on the right more generally, for a long time have championed free speech as one of their core issues. Because we have lived in, for decades at this point, a climate of fear around talking about certain issues and criticising certain ideas and this sort of thing. The concepts of, and the labels of, the accusations of, the smears of racism, transphobia, Islamophobia, all of these sorts of things are designed to have a chilling effect on speech. And so I think people have rightly been tired, exhausted by this culture of silence that has existed around a lot of issues that are worthy of discussion. But at the same time, I do think on the other end of this, we do need to have a conversation about the kind of society that we want to live in. Because in my view, those people who call themselves like free speech absolutists, who believe that you should be able to say literally whatever you want and that there should be no consequences, I don't think I agree with that. I actually think that it's not particularly conservative to think in that way, because my guiding principle in my view of the world is not freedom, in and of itself, right? Freedom as an end in and of itself. Because I think freedom ultimately, as with all things, is it's a means to an end, right? And so limitless freedom of speech in and of itself as a goal, I don't think is that noble. Because what we really should be prioritizing is, how do we build a good society, one that is oriented towards truth and goodness and beauty, that we want to bring children into, that we feel safe bringing children into, where we're not worried that our children's minds are going to be filled with ideas that fundamentally don't have their best interests at heart, as is the case right now, given what is kind of promoted and propagated through the education system and the media. Do we want to live in a society where people are permitted to literally just say whatever they want? And I got to say, I'm uneasy about that idea. I don't know that it would make a good society. And I think, as with all things, the conservative fundamental principle of conservatism is a recognition of the value of boundaries. And that has to go for speech as well.
Yeah, so my response to that debate is very much in line with yours. I think that freedom of speech is sort of adhered to by certain aspects or certain corners of the right who see it as almost a dogmatic ideology. Freedom of speech, no matter what, say whatever you like. Nothing should be criminalized, but there are lines to be drawn. I think points that I can draw out from what you've just said, which are interesting, is this broader discussion that we keep having, which is the individual over the common good and the collective. And I think if you pursue this idea of freedom of speech as this like dogmatic, I have a right to say whatever I want, no matter what.
It's like a good in and of itself.
Exactly. Then I think, but it also ties into this idea that we are like just individuals who have these like inalienable rights that we can just enforce on other people no matter what, even if they hurt other people, even if they're wrong, even if they mislead people to untruth, which I think is so brilliant about what you said about this idea that we are guided by the truth, that we are interested in discovering the truth, and that is the reason why we debate in the first place. So the point is that our speech in politics or in media should be actually guided towards the common good, and should be, and to that end, not this entire freedom where you can just be horrible or mean or say what is cross lines, but actually should be always thinking about these like higher noble values in our society.
And on that point, I think another really important point to make here is people believe things for all sorts of reasons, right? And people believe things for reasons that are not the truth, right? I think people are driven.
Also, people say things for multiple reasons and not always are driven by the truth.
And this idea that if only we could discover the truth through limitless discourse, then everybody will naturally come to that position. It's not true, because people believe things for reasons of pride, for reasons of reputation, and for reasons of opportunity and this sort of thing. People believe things and say things for all sorts of different reasons. And I think it's very difficult to argue somebody out of a position using reason that they were not argued into using reason. If they have arrived at a position because that position serves them and justifies certain lifestyle decisions and this sort of thing, you're not going to get through to those people through the free marketplace of ideas. And ultimately, the idea that speech and debate is everywhere and always a truth-seeking exercise, I just don't think it's true. I think it's actually it's a delusion that is the case. And I think until we get real about that, I don't know that we're tackling this issue seriously. Because I think, as with all things in politics, people are so taken in by the narratives around the issue that they struggle to see the issue, for what it actually is. Because, like you say, people, they worship freedom of speech. They commit to it as an article of faith, when actually it's just as worthy of criticism and of analysis as anything else. And the idea that it's everywhere and always a good thing, I think, is also worthy of critique.
I think, before we probably definitely move on to a very linked but different topic, one quick thing I wanted to say was that, however, given the age we live in, where there is legislation which directly curtails our ability to have conversations, which might, cause offence essentially to some certain groups, I think free speech is worth defending on the whole. We are at a time where, we obviously understand that there is a wider guiding principle to why we speak freely and why we have, but why there are also limits. However, I think for the purposes of our current status in our society, that is worth bearing in mind that we're in an age where generally it is under attack. And however, that does also need to have its limits.
I agree. And what I would say is the pursuit and very idea of truth is what's under attack. And it's in the attacking of truth that speech is curtailed. Exactly. It's not in the pursuit of truth. And I think that, as I said before, our guiding principle should be the pursuit of truth. And I think that absolutely in this day and age, speech is an important part of that, because truthful speech is what's currently being policed. And that's a total inversion. It's a total inversion of what's just and what's right.
Moving on to our next topic, we are going to be talking, I think, broadly about the rise of all these little political parties that we've seen, from Reform to the Green Party, gaining traction and sweeping up votes, especially becoming very popular on social media, which is a very interesting phenomenon we'd like to delve into. Charlie, what do you make of the Green Party's recent success that everyone's talking about? Zack Polanski has this video which has accrued lots of views on YouTube. He is trying to appeal and is, I guess, successfully appealing to a lot of young people in this one particular issue of, climate justice and the green energy revolution, as they call it. Do you think that's mirrored by Reform? What are the differences here?
It's very interesting.
Or is there a sort of gravitation towards these like one issue political parties.
I think it's very interesting, this Zack Polanski phenomenon, because last I saw, the Greens were, and this was this morning, the Greens were polling at 15%, which is astonishing. I don't think they've ever polled that highly before. Bearing in mind they have fewer MPs in Parliament than Reform do. This is certainly a manifestation of a phenomenon that's happening on the right, which is to say people abandoning the traditional party of the right, which is obviously the Conservative Party, in favour of an insurgent party that they feel represents their concerns better, basically. And I think a lot of those people who are naturally of the left are probably looking at the Labour Party and what it has become under Keir Starmer and thinking this is not my political home. And I completely understand why they would think that, because I have certain, I won't say left-wing sympathies, but there are positions that those on the left hold that I completely understand, right? And I think that a lot of these concerns, when it comes to economics, for example, and the state of the British economy, what I call the post-woke left, which is to say people like Polanski, people like Gary Stevenson, people on Politics Joe and elsewhere, these people who are recognizably of the left, but they're not exactly, wrapped in a rainbow flag, as it were. They have very clearly embraced the ideas and the principles of wokeness, but they are now speaking in a far more kind of punky, edgy, anti-capitalist, more traditionally socialist way. I think that's a big part of the reason why people like Polanski and the Green Party are cutting through, because they are speaking in a language that certainly appeals to young people, right? Because they're talking about why can't you own a home? Why is housing so expensive? Why is pay so terrible? I mean, Polanski did this video where he opens up by saying, why is everything shit? Which I thought was, it's crass, but it's pretty funny, right? And I can understand why that would appeal to certain people.
Yeah. I think my issue is that, and again, it's similar sort of tactics to maybe the Tony Blair era, where if you have a very simple message, drill it into people with something presentable, you can sort of get your ideas, which are often more insidious, sinister, than your presentation is, to have this like wide appeal, when actually when you do some digging and you look into the policies that are being promoted, they're actually not only crazy but also slightly dangerous.
Yes.
So Zack Polanski is an example. I saw him on my TV talking about his ideas, and he was saying that essentially advocating for distribution of wealth.
Yes.
Now that is something that just, I think, in the heart of every Brit should cause immediate consternation. It's always, the tax, rise capital gains, same tax threshold as income tax. I mean, these are policies which would have an insane effect on our economy, drive down entrepreneurism, drive down investment, have an extremely deteriorating effect, especially on the young. And yet he's just, brandishing his views. I mean, I'm sure he's a nice person and he comes across as presentable, but do you think it's dangerous that these people have these views that are just actually, if you look at them more clearly, that really, there's not much behind them to actually be effective?
I think there's a few points to make here, because this is the point with what I call the post-woke left, is a lot of their analysis, and this is the case with a lot of left-wing thinkers, this is the case with Marx, actually, is if you read their analysis of the situation, the analysis is often quite good, actually. They're observing things that are just true, right? But it's their solutions that are the problem. Because like Gary Stevenson, for example, you listen to what he says about the economy and the concentration of wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer people, and the way in which these huge multinational asset management corporations like BlackRock and others exert this insane influence, unaccountable influence over our societies. He's right about all of that. But then when he says that the solution to this problem is to basically just steal money from people and redistribute it, you realize that you're dealing with somebody who fundamentally just doesn't grasp what's actually necessary, right? Because Polanski very much, Polanski is all in for a wealth tax, as you said. And others in that kind of emerging faction of the left, that is basically their kind of flagship policy, right? But once again, I understand why this is appealing to people, right? Because a lot of people, young people especially, are so exasperated by the economic situation, by the fact that merely owning a home is viewed today as being some kind of distant goal, right? That's just so abnormal historically. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, I mean, look, for example, one reason for that is mass immigration, right? And that is one issue that these people will never address. They refuse to acknowledge the fact that the inflation of the population and the lack of house building that has accompanied that obviously is going to drive up the cost of housing, right? And they never acknowledge that, because in their heart of hearts, they are ultimately, they do basically agree that mass immigration is a good thing, right?
So
and
blinded by ideology.
Well, exactly.
The Green Party, the issue is that I agree that there are points that are being made which are very valid. You know, why is it that our generation will struggle to own a home one day? That's astonishing. And that is the fault, obviously, of the governments of the last decades. But I think trying to push this green agenda, which does blind people with this kind of doctrine which they worship, is so damaging, because you just end up in this like sort of web of lies that everything can be fixed if we just make it all CO2, but actually that's just going to impoverish people.
But and what that really means is just if you just give the government more and more power and money and everything.
That's never solved any problems. No. I think Thatcher was so right when she was like, there is no such thing as government money, there's only taxpayers' money, and we just seem to forget that. Turn to the government for solutions which they themselves have created. I think that can be seen probably most clearly in the lockdown. Do you remember when everyone was sacking Boris for being our saviour, whilst it was his fault we were in that situation in the first place? Yeah. Such funny times.
Yeah, I've got to say, I mean, there is another point here, because Thatcher as an answer to Polanski is quite, I think it's quite obvious in a lot of ways, but I don't know that is actually the solution, because I think that the idea that free market capitalism and kind of the idea that the market is going to solve all problems has been wedded to conservative ideology since Thatcher. But I don't know that in the 21st century it is the right approach to economics, because I do think that it's actually free market capitalism that's largely to blame for a lot of the problems that we have today. Like mass immigration, for example, is a capitalist project. It's the desire to bring in as much cheap labor as possible so that you can drive up profits. It's not some kind of, it was never driven by left-wing interests. It's always been driven by corporate interests, right? So I think there is an interesting debate here.
Yeah, there was a time, and I think what Thatcher did really well was sort of centre the family and the individual within society. But of course, back then it was such a different landscape from the one in which we find ourselves today. I mean, the issue is that there was this major corruption of, I think, the free market and the rise of conglomerates, the rise of multinational organisations whose only aim was literally capital. And in that pursuit of making money, then of course human beings are just
fungible units
to hike up production.
Yeah. Well, I would argue.
This is the thing. I think but I don't think Thatcher's outdated. I think what we need is someone, not in terms of exact policies, because obviously, as I said, just things are so tremendously different right now that just probably simply wouldn't work. But in terms of having that sort of grit and that like very common sense approach to issues. So, you know, she wasn't playing. She was very fiscally prudent, which is something the government is absolutely not.
Yeah.
And you know, she had this sort of like truly, I guess, like household management way of approaching economics, which I think is so attractive. It's very much like, well, we can allocate this to this. You know, we don't need to spend any more than we have. And we just seem to be living in this sort of world where our government just throws money at the NHS. Their solution is always, you know, why don't we just allocate more funding? Higher taxes, more funding. Higher taxes, more funding. That is why we're in the situation that we're in, because we've been living in this like land of the magic money tree, both from a party which called themselves conservative and plainly wasn't, and now even worse under a Labour Party, which just their only solution is to hike taxes, as they say. Or they say is their only solution.
Indeed, I think we'll have to return to the topic of economics at some point, because I sense that there might be some disagreement there. Even. But back to the larger point though about Polanski and the Green Party. I think another thing that is interesting here is this is a man who's calling himself an eco-populist, right? He's quite readily wearing the label of populist.
That sounds so scary.
Well, I think the interesting thing is populism is an ideology, if you want to call it an ideology, an approach. I think it's more of a style than it is an ideology. That's traditionally associated with the right. Like when you say populist to most people, they'll be thinking of Farage and others, right? But actually, I think of populism as being, as I say, more of a technique or a style. And I think that it is a poisonous phenomenon, right? Because I think what populism is at its core is essentially meeting the crowd where they are on issues and telling the crowd what they want to hear, right? This is what Polanski does, and this is also what Farage does to a certain extent, and various other populists across the landscape. And maybe this might just be the game you have to play when you're in a democratic system, where you do have to pursue that which is popular over that which is true. But I think the interesting thing here is that real leadership is not just like meeting the crowd where they are and telling them what they want to hear.
It's elevating.
It's bringing the crowd forward with you.
Yeah.
And I see very few people on the British political landscape actually doing that right now.
Well, that's interesting because I think that, you know, we have this wonderful phrase that the modern currency is not in truth, but is in slogans.
Yes.
And I think that can be seen reform and also in party.
Certainly.
What I'm curious, though, is that when I look back and you see interviews of politicians like Tony Benn on the left, or other such figures, Margaret Thatcher even, ministers, when they used to have to really be held accountable by the media, they were grilled on their ideas and they had to have an intellectual, rational philosophy driving politics. Substance.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, that's just not the case these days. They can basically get away with saying whatever they want and they go relatively unchallenged. Yeah. And, you know, obviously you can dig deeper. And something that we want to promote on this show especially is, you know, asking those broader questions. Yes. Why do you believe what you believe? What is underpinning your values and your principles? And politics has become something that is just, as you said, like it's just feeding people what they want to hear, capitalizing on their anger and their resentment.
It's not interested in truth.
It's not interested in truth. So is that, you know, do you see us eventually moving towards a political system where we have the Green Party and reform?
Well,
is it truly the end of the Conservatives and Labour?
The thing is, right, I think people radically underestimate the extent to which those two parties can reinvent themselves, right? Both have done this over the courses of their lifetimes. And I think those of us who are very much in the kind of political media news 24-hour cycle type thing, it's easy for us to fall into this trap of thinking that what's happening right now is the most important thing. But actually we forget that a general election, there's no reason to believe that a general election will happen any sooner than 2029, right? And a hell of a lot of stuff can happen in that time. I think it's entirely possible that both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party reinvent themselves as a response to the threats that they're facing from both sides, right? I think actually, something I've said before elsewhere, is that in two figures in Parliament right now, you have a glimpse of the politics of the 2030s, right? And those figures are Rupert Lowe, my boss, and Jeremy Corbyn, right? Because what you see there is a far more authentic, far fresher, far more energized version of the left, of the left and the right of the political landscape.
Do you think that's just authentic, perhaps more traditional, more extreme, and then perhaps less likely to be popular? Because this is the thing. So let's start with Jeremy Corbyn, because I used to be a massive fan. He was the first politician that I actually gravitated towards. He was, you know, at 16 years old, because he had this very approachable, I guess, sort of presentation. He was the guy who baked his own bread. Yeah. And I thought that to me was just so attractive.
And he obviously believes what he says. You know? He obviously has principles.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, he had inherited Tony Benn, who is, I think, my real hero. Love Tony Benn. Yeah. This, like, almost, you know, Eurosceptic, actually, Tony Benn was, of course, vision and understanding of politics, which, you know, was about community and was about the common good. And insofar as they could see the rise of supranational institutions, whether that be corporates or projects like the European Union taking over, those don't have the best interests of people at heart. So I was very attracted towards those politics. You know, Jeremy Corbyn sadly has been a disappointment on that front. But I think it's interesting you point him out, because there is an element of authenticity in him, which I think is quite appealing.
This, I think, is what a lot of people, again, especially young people, are craving, is just somebody that they feel is in their corner and isn't just like stringing them along and spinning a web of lies. Because so many of the politicians who currently sit in the House of Commons, you look at them and you listen to them when they speak, and you can just tell you don't believe a word of what you're saying. right? Whereas those two figures...
Have you seen any of like the Labour ministers speak? Like, is this what our government is doing?
Yeah. But that is the kind of person...
Like there's nothing, there's no substance there, there's no like actual like deeper thought about the policies that you're proposing, which will have a massive effect on all of our lives.
Yeah, but this is the kind of person that is selected for in our system, unfortunately. Exactly. And the reason that I highlight those two...
In both parties, in both the Conservative and Labour Party. Why is there such a dry up of talent?
Well, I mean, I think it is because, once again, our politicians are encouraged to just say what's popular as opposed to what's true. And those two things are rarely the same thing, right? And I think that what makes Corbyn and Lowe both noteworthy is they both buck that trend. I think they're both more interested in what they feel is true. Now, look, I disagree with Corbyn on a lot, but I have no reason to believe that he doesn't actually sincerely believe the things that he says. And Rupert, I know, is the same, right? And the reason I highlight those two is because, one, they fulfill that kind of brief that you laid out, which is to say, when they're interviewed, they can explain in detail the reasons why they believe in each and every principle they hold, right? There's a real foundation to their worldview that many of our other politicians simply don't have, right? And you scratch beneath the surface, and these are deeply mediocre people in a lot of cases. And I also think, as I said, people are just...
Deeply mediocre, that's very kind.
Yeah, well, maybe. But honestly, I think people are just crying out for authenticity. Yeah. They're crying out for leadership as well, right? Because once again, Corbyn and Lowe, I don't think just tell the crowd what they want to hear, as the populists do. And so how the Conservative Party and the Labour parties meet these challenges, I think will be the next interesting thing. Does the Labour Party go in a more punky, edgy direction? I find that extremely hard to believe under Starmer. Does the Conservative Party go in a more radical direction? I'm seeing more green shoots there. I think that the Conservative Party are actually understanding what time it is at the national.
The Labour Party, goodbye.
Yeah.
Quite finished. I mean, listen, they're at the moment, I'm just so curious as to who they're appealing to, because Keir Starmer,
middle managers. Yeah, they're the party. Honestly, they are the party. They're the political wing of the managerial class. They are the party of university administration, corporate HR, and the civil service.
Right.
That is the constituency that they represent.
Interestingly, on that subject of like the university middle management. If you saw that announcement of the recent policy about the hiking of university fees in line with inflation, that's going to make them so bitterly unpopular with the future generations. And I'm angry as well, because like there is no excuse for that, considering that university is now just
a scam.
Doesn't guarantee you a job. Courses are often shoddily prepared and not very intellectually stimulating whatsoever.
And honestly, the inflation
pay more.
And the dilution in the value of degrees as well is another huge thing. So, hey, Alice, maybe there is a good side to this, which is that it will disencourage people from going to university, which I think is probably a good thing.
I hope so, but my fear is that it's just going to mean that people get more in debt, because at the same time they're clever. They know how to serve their masters well. They are increasing university prices, but also saying, hey, look, we'll give you higher maintenance loans, which everyone knows literally means nothing more than you will be more in debt.
Yes.
But anyway, we'll see what happens with that. But interestingly, Keir Starmer, insipid leader. I just can't wait for the day that he is ousted by, honestly, whoever.
But who? I mean, who on that front bench is going to replace him? Seriously?
Oh, not the front bench. I'm just honestly praying for a different party altogether.
So, I mean, God knows, like, you look at the political landscape right now, and I think we're going to go into this in a minute, but I've been away for a couple of weeks, and just watching from the sidelines and watching from the outside and stepping out of the fray of day-to-day politics, just the absolute state of it in this country. I mean, it's really embarrassing.
Shocking. It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. It's demoralizing.
It is.
But if anything, I mean, like, I don't know about you, but that motivates me to actually to just go further. I mean, why should we, in this time of crisis and in this time of like just people crying out for truth, why should we compromise at this point? And I think that is what increasingly those who are savvy at the top of these parties are realizing, is that this idea that you do have to appeal to the center and that you have to be kind of, meet people where they are fundamentally. I think that we're seeing that to be a fantasy. I think that what people want is radicalism. People want radical change because they're looking at the country as it is now and the trajectory that it's on, and they're saying, I don't want this. I don't want this for my children, and I don't want to live in a country that is governed in this way.
Interestingly, do you think, though, someone like Rupert Lowe or Jeremy Corbyn, respectfully, they are on the older side. I don't think they're people that you look to and you feel immediately inspired by. Like, you know, good old Jeremy Corbyn, he had his time when we were all chanting Jezza or whatever. But
Speak for yourself, Alice.
or whatever the chant was. But that was a long time ago. He's just not relevant anymore. And Rupert Lowe, he's appealing definitely to a certain part, but is he going to be the future leader of Britain? I really highly doubt that.
Well, look, I'm working on it. We're working on it. No, I mean, look, I think it's more what these figures embody, right? It's the principles that they represent, right?
This is the thing. But then in that case, I think you need principle, but you need someone with fire.
Yes. Well,
People with fire.
yeah.
So
Yes. Well, God knows. I mean, look.
A solution will just be provided to the British public.
Yeah. Well, look, I think I am actually heartened every day by the quality of people that are coming through, like on our side of politics, quite frankly. The caliber of person that is choosing to, is feeling compelled to, out of a sense of duty, become involved in politics because they go out onto the street and they look at what's happening.
Well, that's the only
it's really encouraging.
Should be in politics. I think the reason why you should be in politics
Yeah.
is precisely because you have that fire in you that says, I need to do something about what I see. That was the fire that I originally was inspired by during the Brexit days.
And I'll tell you something else, like not to sound too kind of apocalyptic, but I do think that the way things are going in this country, those people who are in it for reputational, monetary, careerist reasons, they're just going to fall away. And because I think there will be a natural process of selection. Well, God willing. But there will be this process of, I think, natural selection on the political landscape, where those who are in it for the wrong reasons, which is to say reasons of pride, reasons of just self-serving reasons, they will just fall away. And I think those people who are the kind of Carlylean figures who are motivated not by self-interest, but by a sense of duty, by a profound lack of sort of desire to compromise on the truth. Those people will be the people that I hope lead this country in the future. Because if they're not, I don't know what's going to happen.
That's a wonderful thought. And I actually agree with you. I think we've swung so far to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the Osborns of the world, the Miliband's, the Camerons, like the people who are just bland, who have nothing to offer, that at this point that we will see a rise, I think both on the left and right, and the different sort of spectrums of people who, okay, you know, they have conviction. They might be more forthright in their views. They might be unprepared to compromise. But, you know, if that means the Zack Polanski's, Jeremy Corbyn's against the Rupert Lowe's and Kira Dow's Alice Grant's, then I would much rather live in a world where we have people who are convicted and who believe in something. And
maybe not convicted. That wouldn't be great. Who have conviction, perhaps.
Who have conviction.
But probably don't want people...
convicted in their beliefs.
Yeah.
Rather than these like insipid, middle managers vibes. It's not it.
Indeed.
Okay. We also have very good news to present on our show today because Charlie got married 2 weeks ago.
I did. Thank you very much.
We wanted to talk a bit about this on the show because firstly, you're 24, which is an extremely young age to make such a commitment.
Nearly 10 years younger than the national average.
Really?
It is, which I think is damning in and of itself, actually.
Yeah. But it's also very impressive, I think. And we were talking about this earlier, but also that you would be considered old. But
in years gone by.
Previous decades.
True, yeah.
I don't personally agree with that. But that's only also because I think that the best choices in life are the ones that you make intentionally and with thought. But I think you are such a mature individual and so inspirational in so many ways. But I think in this as well, it's incredible because you made that decision at such a young age. And you are someone who actually speaks about principles about family and about the importance of tradition, and then you go ahead and you do it. Like that's you live what you preach.
This is a hugely important thing, I think, because we opened up by talking about free speech and debate and all these sorts of things, and I really have realised that the most effective way to communicate the value of the principles and the values that we kind of seek to promote is not by talking endlessly about them, right? Which is kind of ironic considering we're on a kind of talk show type thing right now. But it is to actually, it's to live them though. It is we have to live the principles that we seek to propagate, because in living them, we show that this is not, we're not just saying these things, but we actually do believe in them, right? Because I think that what people believe is demonstrated by how they act as opposed to what they say, right? Because people can say whatever they want, but actually when they, when you look at how they live, that's where you see what they actually believe, right? And I'm not saying that I'm somehow kind of, I've only got married, right? This is not some like big radical thing that I've done. Like most people get married, but it is interesting to me that the average age of marriage in this country now is about 33, right? Because historically that is very high. That's old. That's old to get married, right? And I think the average age of childbirth is about the same, which again is historically speaking very high, right? And I think that the reason for this is it's because of the culture that we live in and that has been developing over the last, I would say, 80 years, which is a culture that has the individual, which is to say the self, at the center of it. The center of gravity of modern culture is not duty or anything like that. It is limitless individual self-expression, right? It is the desire to maximize kind of, individual freedom, individual pleasure, quite frankly. And a society that champions those values above and beyond the values of duty and of service. That's exactly right. Is not long for this world, quite frankly, because sure you can have like maybe one generation of hedonism and everything. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it was probably the baby boomers that did, right? The kind of culture of the 60s and the societal changes that the entire West went through during that time. That was one of the, and also what was happening in academia at that time, the kind of ideas that were being developed at that time about truth and about the kind of, I don't know, the value of different lifestyles and this sort of thing, and basically relativism, right? The moral and cultural relativism that is now everywhere and that so many people subscribe to, right? So many people think that it is wrong and immoral to draw qualitative distinctions between different decisions and different lifestyles. Yeah. And what I would say to that...
There is objective truth. Interestingly, do you think, and we've seen this in the media a lot, there's this talk about a resurgency of traditional values, especially Christianity among the young, and I see it for sure. I mean, even in like secular contexts, don't expect people to be Christian, and that they are in the workplace or in, in university even. Yeah. You're seeing more people coming together, united by faith and traditional concepts. Yeah. Do you think there's a resurgence in that?
Well, I mean, the numbers indicate
response to this sort of moral relativism, which has clearly just not worked or not produced the sort of lie that was told that it would produce, which is that it will give you freedom and happiness and pleasure and just like endless joy to do what you want, when actually that leads to a feeling of emptiness and doesn't make us feel better, but actually makes us more alone and despairing, because that is not how we are truly satisfied.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think it is any coincidence that every kind of mouthpiece of power of culture in our society, again, from the universities to the education, the larger education system, the media, the entertainment industry, the government itself, corporate HR, all of these different kind of mouthpieces all walk in lockstep about what is moral and what a good life looks like. And again, the fundamental principle that they all seek to propagate is that the individual is the most important kind of unit of analysis, and that maximizing individual liberty and individual kind of pleasure basically is the most important thing. I mean, the entire project of woke ideology is basically founded on the idea that self-invention and that limitless self-expression is the meaning of life, and that happiness and fulfillment are going to be found in those things. And I think what a lot of certainly young people are realizing, often because they are meeting the brick wall of reality with their head, right? They are realizing that actually, when I live these principles out, when I embody these principles, what it leads to is not fulfillment and happiness, but instead depression and anxiety.
And isolation, because I think there's something to be said that there's a reason why our society has developed in a certain way over hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And that these things work, that there is natural instincts, that there are biological instincts. And to just set those aside because, you know, they seemed maybe out of date or, you know, boring. Restricted to the 60s generation.
Yeah.
Has proved to just be so wrong and into so much confusion.
Yeah.
That's what it said. It's led to confusion. People are not growing up feeling as if this endless, as you said, like search for self-expression is making them any happier or actually revealing who they are truly, but instead making them just very confused.
Yes.
And I see that a lot with, I think, especially like young Generation Z.
100%. Yeah.
They, you know, there's so many issues that could just be addressed to people where, you know, it's okay to actually just be normal. Like, it's okay to just, you know, be a woman and a man and to want to have a family and to get married. Yeah. And, you know, if that's not your calling, that's obviously also fine. But the point is that, you know, that, you're right. There's been this atomization, hasn't there? And a fragmentation of our society as soon as you start to pull apart fundamental values which worked for so long and which produced community and cohesion.
And on the topic of young people kind of returning to, as it were, a more traditional, conservative, possibly Christian view of the world. Look, I think that some people overstate the extent to which that's happening. I would love to believe that Gen Z are all like super based and like really go Christian and trad and all the rest of it, but I don't. Well, no, it's not. There are plenty of people out there who do believe in these principles and who embody them in their own lives. But I do think that it is a certain type of person who is that way, because we can't forget that, look, the majority of people are just, you know, the schools and the media and, you know, again, every mouthpiece of power has told them to live a certain way. And so they're seeking to live out those ideas. Like, that's not, it's understandable that that's the world we live in. But what I would say,
conditioning, there's been social engineering for this to happen. Yes. And that's incredibly hard to fight against for anyone. And something else that I'd like to draw your attention to quickly is also the fact that with this rise of like a lack of making these independent decisions for oneself at whatever age you are about what you want to do with your life, you want to marry, you know, these like, you know, quite significant milestones in life. There's also been increased independence on the state as this sort of provider of every solution as to, you know, benefits and just an increase in the nanny state. And, you know, we saw this to a height in COVID, but obviously we've had this welfare state building and building and building. And this is so contrary to values that, you know, leaders like Margaret Thatcher once stood up and said no to, and that she really believed in autonomy. And I think that maybe the real crisis here is people lacking in that sense of autonomy. And, you know, that doesn't mean individualism. That doesn't mean being selfish, but it's an understanding about your own, like, sovereign authority over oneself. And your inalienable rights are not the ones which the government tell you have. They're the ones that you're born with. They're the rights that, you know, go and get married, have a family. Like, that's a right that everyone has, but that's been almost taken away from us because we don't have the economic means to buy a house. We do, you know, and that is the fault of a government which hasn't had our best interests at heart.
Truly. And I think what you're getting at here is essentially the fact that patriarchy, as it were, is an iron law, right? So you will either have the father, husband as the head of the household, or you will have the state as the head of the household.
That's very interesting.
And the role that is fulfilled by, as it were, the patriarch in the household is the same, whether it is the husband and the father or the state, because it is to protect and to provide. And if that role is not fulfilled by the father and by the husband, well, then the state is going to step in, right? But largely, I think it's been the other way around, right? I think as the state has encroached on the household,
they've taken that role.
Yeah, they have.
Do you remember all the talk about like the one nation paternalism, the conservatism, which sort of surfaced, I guess, under Cameron?
Yeah.
And became this like new ideology, which is that conservatism can be bolstered if you actually are influenced by these leftist ideas.
Yes,
the state is this kind of like paternal. I mean, it makes me actually, but grotesquely.
It's just, well, look,
because it's so wrong to look at the state as like this solution, this provider, this protector. Like, authority, that is not the reason why we invest authority in politicians and in our government. Their role is to make good laws. Their role is to be there when people really need it, to, deal with our foreign policy, to make wider decisions, importantly, for the benefit of the community and for the common good. Their role is not to be there to fall back on, when things go wrong in our individual lives. We elect them, we entrust them with our vote because they stand on a mandate to represent us internationally, to make good laws and, ultimately to provide some level of welfare when needed.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I am
we are very independently minded people. It's so much easier to take a step back and to be like, actually, with independence comes responsibility, but is the crisis that in a world where it's easier to run away from responsibility, that's what tends to happen.
Well, and not only is it easier, it's enabled and it is encouraged as well. Now, look, as a man of the right, I'm a big believer.
Man of the right.
Yeah, I am a big believer in the state and the ability of the state to do good things. But I think that the kind of Cameronite one nation paternalist understanding of that is nonsensical, and it's failed, right? Because they tried it and it's failed. Exactly. However, that's not to say that we shouldn't use the state for good things that are in the interests of the nation and of households when the time is right. I think that this is another.
Defense is another massive one.
Sure, yeah.
Foreign policy, defense. Yeah. Kick in, when it really matters, basically.
Yeah. But this is another area where I'm, very skeptical of Thatcherism, because I do think that just acting as though the state doesn't matter and that the state is everywhere and always a bad thing, I think that is misguided. And I don't think this country has ever really believed that until the period of Thatcher. I think to wrap up today, I would say I've really enjoyed this first episode of Radio Britannia. Alice, I hope you have as well. And I think, look, there is as much nonsense on the right as there is on the left in British politics. There's so much noise in our landscape, and so few people who are genuinely motivated by the pursuit of what is true, as opposed to the pursuit of what is popular or convenient. And I hope that with this as a vehicle, I hope that we can be pursuers of truth in this. So thank you very much, Alice. And
thank you very much to everyone who's listened and who's tuned in to our episode. We've had the most fun talking about some of the most important issues that are facing our society. And, Charlie and I are both young, but we are very passionate and we care deeply about Britain. That's why we're here. That's why we do this. It's because we want to make a change. And we also want to encourage conversation about these topics which aren't being spoken enough about in pursuit of truth. And that is what we promise you. So we will always be here to speak the truth, just to speak what we truly, truly believe in. Yeah. So, thank you very much for tuning in.
And join us next week, same time, for more of these discussions that we hope you have enjoyed.